Hi everyone, I'm Rodney. I'm here with BoardGameGeek at SPIEL 2019, and I've been joined by Tommy and Dylan from Lindvander Games. You got something to show us here. I don't have a box to show, so it's kind of a mystery.
It is weird. It is. We don't have the box approved yet to show, so we've been under strict instruction not to show it. Of course, this video is being filmed non-live.
Yes.
So you know when you do see this was filmed probably like 3 weeks ago. And we're here to show you a super secret project we call Super Secret Project Number 1.
Okay.
And it is called Divinity, as in Divinity Original Sin, and it's the board game. And this is the Divinity Original Sin board game.
This was originally a video game, right?
This was originally a video game. It's a very high-selling. I believe it was #1 for almost a year or so on Steam, and it's made by Larian Studios.
Okay.
And Larian Studios approached us at San Diego Comic-Con last year, and said we would like to switch to analog and try something new. And our team got together, and over one, and I believe I'm allowed to say this, one very long, grueling, reiteration after reiteration year, we've pulled together what we think is a very innovative and hopefully a very exciting adventure board game.
Well, going analog is what all the cool kids are doing.
Analog, we can switch to analog.
So how did you kind of bring the video game to life in this format?
Very bluntly, we created a couple versions of the game,
right.
and then we were fired. No, I'm kidding. And then the versions of the game were not approved.
I would have liked to have heard that story though.
Well, you'll be hearing it. Yeah. And then we actually the Cinderella story of it is that we were actually told, okay, listen, this isn't working out. Thank you so much. But our team we don't like to hear those things. So we worked really hard to create another version of the game and get one last shot. And they brought us out to Belgium.
Right.
We gave one last shot. We hit it. And they were in love, and that was it. Wow. It started, and then it's full steam ahead, and now we have been working very diligently to get this game to the stage that it's at.
Okay.
So it's kind of a Cinderella story. They're excited about it. We're giving BGG the real drop on this. So there it is. Hopefully it's big. Yeah. Hopefully it'll do what we hope it will do.
Well, third time was the charm there. So
that's pretty much it.
What's the idea here in the game?
So the way Divinity works is that we designed the board game so that it's split up between 3 different phases.
Okay.
There's a story phase, there's an exploration phase, and then eventually, because it's Divinity, there's a combat phase.
All right.
Because you're going to get in a fight with people eventually.
Sure.
So each of these phases, we move smoothly from one to the other.
Yeah.
So when we're in the story phase, we take the storybook, which I'll show here.
Yeah.
And it works like a choose your own adventure book, where there's sections that you read out loud, and then you get to a choice and you decide what you want to do.
Right.
Once you make that decision, the storybook will tell you to set up the location. And this is what we have here. The location has a bunch of different areas located around it.
Right.
Several of which you will notice give you different bonuses. That applies in the combat phase, not so much right now.
Okay.
But some of which might be locked.
Which we'll get to.
We'll explain that in a moment.
It's a pretty unique element of the board game. Just for the record, all this is prototype material, so nothing here is in the final stage yet.
Right.
So
some changes can happen.
These are handmade prototypes that we've worked on in-house, and so that's...
And just to be clear, is it cooperative, competitive?
100% cooperative.
100% cooperative.
Well, it's 100% cooperative until maybe sometimes there are some things you do for yourself.
Right.
Unless you have the rogue who likes to steal stuff from the other players. Some groups have that player, but you know.
But generally it is cooperative.
But in the storytelling, we're deciding together what we want to do as a group type of thing?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So then what you do is when you enter the exploration phase is you will have a miniature representing your character.
Right.
And you will decide where you want to go by putting your miniature out on the location card.
Sure.
Once everyone has done that, you all take the location card, turn it over, and personally read what happens.
We've got some information here, right.
So the black text is story text that tells you what you see. The red text is game text. And again, early prototype, this may change.
Sure, right. But you get a little bit of the story progression here as well, along with what's happening in the game.
And the important thing to note is that there are clues about what's going on. Like, for example, you'll notice that, and I don't know how well it's going to show up on this picture, but there's a campfire in this picture.
Right.
So that gives you a clue about what's going to happen when you go to this card. You know that there's a campfire in the distance.
Right.
So you start looking at the artwork for these clues, and then the text tells you what happens.
And would some of the images potentially relate to some of what you read in the story here?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. In fact, it'll be very interwoven, including things that enter. Some of these things have keywords that actually interact with your characters, who have keywords. Like if I'm a noble, and you interact with the story, it'll say if you have noble.
Right.
Different choices are made apparent that wouldn't be there if you didn't have a noble.
Sure.
So if no one's playing a noble throughout the game, no one ever.
You might miss those sections of it.
miss
You'll
that
see
something
the
else.
keyword,
Right,
but you
right.
won't know what happens.
Okay.
Exactly.
And a little throwaway out there for fans of the Divinity video game. Pet Pal is a thing, so
Yeah.
if you have Pet Pal, pay attention to where the animals are. It's an ability that
Yes.
players have that let them talk to animals.
Okay.
So, anyway, you do that, you explore. Eventually, these location cards will either direct you to another section in the story,
Right.
or direct you to enter combat. So, when you enter combat, that's where this center dial comes into play. Now, you will put out the monsters in certain locations based upon what the cards tell you to do.
Right. Oh, so these are considered at this spot?
Yep.
Is that the
Exactly.
idea? Okay, I got you.
You can see
All
how
right.
the hexagonal
Yeah.
shape comes into play now to show you where the bad
Okay.
guys are.
And then you will draw from a bag for your initiative order. And what this clock does is it'll tell you who's going to act. When that person acts, it
Right,
then moves
right.
here, and then moves here, so on and so forth. When you get to the end, it goes all the way around to come back to the first person.
This seems to suggest you could end up in a battle with quite a few
Yeah,
characters.
16. It can be pretty big. Also, I mean, the initiative order could swap around, so there's a lot
Okay.
of opportunities to play with, not so much of a static number in it.
Well,
Right.
and there also, for example, is the ability of players to summon smaller beasts that are going to get their own
Initiative
chance
tokens?
when they
Yeah.
go and things
Summoning
like that.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So all of that is baked in. But yes, there is the possibility for the battles to get quite large.
Right, right.
Now, for normal enemies, they have very, very simple things that they do. What you do when they go is you roll this die, and this die will tell you what they will do.
Okay.
It adds a little bit of randomness, so you
Right.
can't perfectly predict the enemy's actions.
Sure.
But the enemy does have a special ability and a preferred target. So I'm going to lift this up nice and close. So for example, this enemy has a special ability of if you leave his space, you automatically get attacked.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And his default target is whoever has the lowest hit points.
Right.
So you know what they're likely to
You
do.
have a little bit of sense that they're programming or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Right,
But-
but this adds
Mix it up.
variability.
Okay.
If you're fighting a boss monster,
They get their own deck of cards.
they have their own deck of cards.
Right.
And just like and I'm sorry, I skipped this.
We'll get to this part. We'll get to this part.
get back to this, but
Yeah.
monsters will have a monster board that's like a player board, and they generate action points every turn.
Okay.
And you keep flipping over cards and do what the monster does as long as they have
Oh, I
enough
see.
action
So they got
points.
9 right now. You'd flip this one. It's cost 5.
Yeah,
Now they won't do
They'll
it.
have their own track for that.
Right,
That's
okay.
Correct.
correct.
But
And they
if he had
generate.
10,
Sure, you
he'd
can
do
do
two of those
gotcha.
in a row.
Gotcha.
Yeah. This is a character board, and there's some unique elements about this character board, which I'll show you in a second. So you have some stats here, and then you have your AP generator. This is your action point generator, which
Right.
you will generate every turn based on your character card that you've chosen, which I don't have any on me. But for example, there's a knight. The starting character card shows you what you have for beginning stats.
Sure.
And then you'll spend your turn spending action points and using some of your special abilities, items, all that stuff. And each special ability has costs. They have a cooldown, which in Divinity and in most games of that nature, they have a
Yeah,
cooldown
right,
factor where
right.
every time your next turn comes, you keep cooling it down. Then it comes back to your hand.
So
Yeah.
your really powerful spells, you're going to have to wait
Yeah, yeah.
till you can use them again.
So you got to time things out, and things have combinations, which is really the hallmark of Divinity. Different elemental interactions and spell synergies that you can cast. So sometimes you might not spend your action points, so you can build it up, build it up, build it up,
So you can do
and then you can start doing all these crazy
right,
things in
right.
the game, right? And then of course you play your cards, you spend your action points, you affect the game, and you move on. What's really interesting about this character board, though, is that all of your elemental interactions, your special abilities, all of the story stuff is actually a character sheet
Oh, okay.
that you can fill out.
Right, right.
And you fill out all your talents and your skills and stuff so that when you pack your game away and come back, all your information is here
Oh,
to
that's
continue
pretty
later.
clever.
And what's great about it is
Good
you can
on
have
that.
multiple
Yeah,
sheets
yeah.
and play with multiple friends.
Right.
And this could be like my BoardGameGeek friends. When I play with the BoardGameGeek guys, we're going to play with this one, right? So that's one of our
clever.
ways to be able to not let the game get destroyed as you're moving along in the Choose Your Own Adventure storyline.
one of the really cool things I want to show you very quickly,
Yes.
which Tommy alluded to, which fans of the video game, again, are going to recognize this, is I can combine certain effects on my cards, either with yours or with my own. For example, I can rain, which makes an area wet,
Yeah.
right? And so it makes it makes all the monsters in that area wet.
Okay, this is a physical condition.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then I can hit them with a lightning bolt, which then
water and
immediately
electricity.
stuns
Yeah, yeah.
them and stuns all the enemies who are wet in the
Oh, that's
area.
neat. Yeah.
So this elemental combination is one of the things that players often rave about in the Divinity video game. We've incorporated it into the board game.
And I suppose this is something where players are, again, maybe around the table saying, look, I want to drop this water
Oh
effect.
yeah.
You get the lightning.
Hey,
We
can you
do
hit him
this.
with water?
Right.
I've got a lightning spell
Okay.
queued up, ready to go.
Right, right.
And you do these elemental combinations, or like the Molotov cocktail. It's like someone else is making them all covered in oil, and I'm just going to throw the Molotov,
Right.
blow it
Light
up.
'em up.
What's crazy though is that if your character's in that space, you also get hit with those
Sure.
things.
Friendly fire
Yes.
is a
So
thing.
Friendly
Okay.
fire is 100% a thing, and there's a
Now-
lot of status effects.
Interesting that he mentioned the Molotov cocktail, because another thing that Divinity has is crafting.
Which you get from looting.
We have a crafting system where you find two different elements. If you put them together, they give you a number.
Right.
You can craft those together to get the item of that number.
So there's
Gotcha,
a deck.
26,
There's a
right,
deck
okay.
full of numbered items,
yeah.
and there's a bag full of these little components, right? So
Yeah.
you just once you start pulling them out and collecting them as a group, you start seeing what combinations
That's a
you
that's a
get.
pretty, my biased opinion, that's a pretty clever crafting system in a board game.
Yeah, we're
I haven't really seen
very
that
happy
before.
with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's such a small component of the game.
Yeah.
It doesn't even affect the story or anything.
Yeah.
It's just a little add-on thing you can do that we think is going to it's just that twist that makes it so.
So if I
different.
pull, if I collect something and it's got a 5, and I find something that's a left piece that's another number, I'm going to find a card that matches that.
yeah,
potentially, or-
there'll be a deck.
Potentially,
and
not
yeah, not every
every
time.
number
Right.
combination works.
Yeah.
But we do have a master key that you
Yes.
can just look up and say, is item 25 in
a
there?
thing, right?
Yep.
Okay, got it.
And then, of course, as things grow, or as well the Kickstarter does, or expansions,
Yeah,
or
it might be some other
BoardGameGeek
things.
promos or
Yeah, yeah.
something, you'll have extra things you can add to that deck, which will give you more and more
Right.
combinations.
Neat.
to the lot.
Very cool.
Yeah. So that's
So there are two final things that
Sure.
we should mention. Combat. When you're attacking, you obviously have your own abilities and your own stats that you're rolling.
Right.
And the way we do combat is it's all determined by these dice.
Okay.
So when you're attacking, you're rolling dice of a certain color. And the dice of different color do different things. Like your black is your basic die.
Yep.
Your blue is very good at doing special attacks. So if you're somebody who uses like poisoned arrows, you're going to want to use the blue
Or the
dice.
blue. Okay. Yep.
The red are for like your heavy fighters who hit and do a lot of damage every turn.
Right.
And so what you do is that you add up the dice, you roll them to see the damage you do.
and you can have combinations and stuff to create really interesting sort of
Right.
effects.
And then you have to take into account the enemy's armor and resistances.
So that's combat, which about the board we should talk about. So the board itself turns into a grid fight. For example, if the ghoul is on the campfire,
Right.
and we have this miniature, these are of course a prototype miniature of Losh
Yeah.
sitting there, and we got the dwarf over here. Every card adjacent to the card that you're on is considered an adjacent move, so you can actually move back and forth.
Right.
Also, the card across is considered adjacent.
All right.
Which means that if I have a range of 2, I can go 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1, 2.
I see. All
Right?
right.
So
Yep,
it's really
yep.
good for archery, and it's good to situate yourself around the board. These icons, of course, will modify your combat
Right.
as you go forward. And that's pretty much the combat system. It is a section of the game. Once the combat's over, you loot, and then you go back to the story, and you continue the story as the game progresses. And that's...
I believe there's only one last thing we need to talk about, which is right in front of you.
So while you are completing the choose your own adventure and you're
Yes.
doing certain things, you have your key your keywords like noble or outlaw. You've got your story
Sure.
choices.
Yeah.
You've got the outcomes of your battle. Because if you lose the fight,
Right.
you don't lose the game necessarily.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll say go to story section, whatever.
Okay.
Things will tell you in the game to check off certain key events, but you don't know why you're checking off those numbers.
Is this something that the game will later say, hey, have you completed a key event, whatever? And
Well,
so, or...
if you check off like key 2, for example,
Yeah.
you don't know why, but later on, all of a sudden you see an O2 here.
Right.
If you've checked off key 2, you can now explore this location. If you didn't, you can't
That's locked
ever see
forever
what's
to you.
under that
Yeah, okay,
thing. So the
okay.
next time you play the game, you're like, I gotta find out where to find out how to check out key 2.
Sure.
What's more important about this is the double edge. We call it the Chronicle system.
Right.
It's a system that we're actually really proud to announce. these key point information pieces will then, at the end of your game, I'm talking about like 8 to 10 play sessions through, when you're finished the whole game, you get to go to a website and put in a unique code once, and you get to put in the data entry of what you did. And this will tell us exactly your path in the game.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
and all of your decisions that you made that are very important at the time.
It's important to realize that this storybook, when I mentioned it's a choose your own adventure, on a single playthrough, we estimate you're only going to see between 25 and 33% of the content.
Right.
So there's going to be, like, you might not even run into the big bad guy that somebody else had a big fight showdown with.
And still get to the end of the story.
And still get to the end of the story.
So it's meant to be replayed then, not just played once
Absolutely.
through.
But the first time you play through is the only time we're going to be able to record the data. We take that data, merge it all together, and then we're able to see what the bell curves tell us, and the medians say, oh, Chapter 4, 80% of the population burnt down the inn.
Right.
Therefore, in Season 2 of this game, that inn is burnt to the ground.
That becomes the effect that most people, when they played, will have done, probably remembered, and will carry on in their
players have the ability to affect the future of the game.
Now imagine you're of the 20% that didn't burn the inn down.
Right.
You're going to be like, what the heck
happened to our inn?
You're going to go back and play the first round of the game to find out what happened, what decision trees you made, right? It's like, oh, we didn't save the girl. It's like, I get it. So that's a Chronicle system, and this is a system we have for other IP that's coming out as well as this, but this is the only IP that you get to know right now.
That's a very cool overview. Do we have a sense of the timeline at all, or when we might see this?
Yeah, so hopefully this comes out on November 12th, but we're not quite sure because the dates get shifted based on, we want to make sure this game is as perfect as it can possibly be. And it is the best representation of Divinity and the Chronicle system that we can get. So therefore, because of that, deadlines are deadlines, but we're not going to put this out in any level of rush. Regardless of when it does get launched, when it gets launched, it will be at a stage where it is pretty much in manufacturing stages.
Right.
We will just need to see how big the Kickstarter is to determine how many extra big plastic monsters and or things that we're going to add to the game. And then at that point, we do have a plan to either have it out at PAX East next year in 2020, or for the board game market, Origins, or more likely Gen Con release.
Okay. So if this was of interest to you, in the description below, you should be able to find a link to the Kickstarter page, or I'm sure Google search will find it as well. But either way, gentlemen, thank you very much for giving us this early tease of the game and sharing this with us.
Thank you so much.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.